We're talking with Stephen Porges, and Stephen has a deep background in the subject of studying the human being from many different angles, and part of it, a huge portion of his life has been spent in the academic, scientific world, and I'm going to ask him to explain his background briefly. It's quite varied and extensive.
Okay, so it's very extensive and a little bit complex, but I've been a faculty member since 1970. So I've been a professor in various departments. I've been a professor in psychology departments, human development department, psychiatry departments, and had affiliations in programs in neuroscience, neurophysiology, and biomedical bioengineering. So my last 4 PhD students were in bioengineering. And I've been, like many academics, I've been in several institutions, and currently I hold appointments as a distinguished university scientist at Indiana University, where I've created at the Kinsey Institute there a traumatic stress research consortium. I hold the position of professor of psychiatry at the University of North Carolina and 2 emeritus positions, one as professor of psychiatry at the University of Illinois in Chicago and a emeritus professor of human development at the University of Maryland. And what I often say is that, longevity helps. So you've been around for a while. There are 2 things, longevity and persistence. And I was in a rush in the beginning, so I had my PhD when I was 25 and was an assistant professor at 25. And so the trajectory was very accelerated when contrasted with today's trajectories of new faculty. So that's my background, but the real issue is not what my degrees are in. It's what I've been interested in, and I was always interested in this bridge between psychological or mental processes and physiology. And in the mid-1960s, when I started graduate school, there was an emerging discipline called psychophysiology. I said, that's it. And that's where I started. And over time, that was my platform. But the platform in psychophysiology as a niche or as a society became less interested in the neural regulation of bodily processes, whether they were autonomic, meaning our organs inside our body, or movements. It became more interested in cortical activity. It became cortical-centric or brain-centric, and that was not really what I was interested in. I was interested in the bidirectional communication between our brain and our body. And that's what I continue to do, and that's really where the theory, the polyvagal theory, emerged as a way of conceptualizing it. In a metaphor, I was looking for the manual of what it is to be a human being.
From a neurophysiological point of view?
But it's not just from that, because it's always going back and forth. It's always bridging. So my perspectives were perspectives of bridging intuition, bridging psychological processes, bridging intentionality with physiology.
Gotcha.
And then understanding that our physiological state, and this is a powerful construct, our actual physiological state, so when we feel that we're kind of jittery and mobilized, or we feel calm, or in a sense dissociating and shutting down, our physiological states provide the neurophysiological platform for a variety of behaviors. And if we accept that, we then start thinking about how can we manipulate or manage our physiological state as a way of treating atypical behaviors, atypical psychological processes.
Gotcha. So things like anxiety could be addressed through that means.
Right. And I would throw out words, not use words like anxiety or even words like stress. I would start talking about the physiological state we're in, and then our labels for that physiological state, our personal narrative. Mm-hmm. So we start saying to someone, you're anxious. And when we say that to someone, we're implying they don't have to be anxious. And if we say, well, your body is in a state of mobilization and defense, we start saying and thinking about how do we support the body so that it calms down. And so we don't go into this notion of responsibility and blame. And I see this as a total product of our culture, which thinks that everything we do is intentional. Mm-hmm. And that we therefore take responsibility, as opposed to an understanding that when our body is in certain states, we have a limited ability to regulate it. And so the real issue is behavioral regulation. So if we start getting interested in like populations of atypical development, like autistic children, we realize that the scientific community, the psychiatric community has failed, and the pharmaceutical community has failed the families of autistic children because it hasn't given them the tools that they want, which is a tool to regulate the child's behavior, to make the child feel safe and calm. And it approaches things either from a behavioral level, which assumes that you can condition or train a hyper reactive nervous system to be calm, and it assumes that you can train a system that is not social, because being social is a violation of being defensive. You can't be defensive. You can't be social if your body's in a state of defense. So we then start trying to train autistic kids to make eye contact when their bodies are saying, I got to turn away because I'm in a state of defense. But it's telling us that there is a portal of intervention, and that portal is to help regulate the physiological state.
Let's use that as a segue to this work that I wanted to talk with you about. It's so fascinating. I came across a woman named Chris Worley, and she has a son who has autism, and she discovered on a visit to a park that he was fascinated with the skateboarders. He just loved sitting there, and he'd watch them all day. And so she thought, well, I'll get him a skateboard. And that seems like such an unlikely thing for somebody with that kind of difficulties to take to. But she helped him. It was a two-person thing. She just didn't give him the skateboard and say, good luck, son. She moved him on the board, and bit by bit he developed more and more confidence with this device, and ultimately became an independent skateboarder. He could do his own skateboarding. So she thought, well, this helped him, maybe it would help other children. So she started arranging for families to come with skateboarding volunteers, people that were expert in skateboarding, and each child would get an expert, and they'd start wherever they were able. Sometimes it was just sit on the board, nothing else. Sometimes it was sit on the board and be pushed. Sometimes it was stand up on the board and nothing, just little steps. And the response, phenomenal. Children that were sort of locked into themselves, suddenly having fun. And she says, Ken, I don't know how it works, Now her interpretation, interestingly enough, and you'll find this interesting, I think, is it's a heart connection between the volunteer and the child. And I said, okay, that makes sense. But then I remembered a lady named Elfriede Hengstberg, lived in the early part of the 20th century, worked with children of all kinds that were having all kinds of difficulties. And she liked to work with them on balance exercises, games. It was really, they were all developed in the spirit of game, in the spirit of play, but they all called for the child to balance. And I know from my life that balance is a full body, spontaneous thing. It's not, your left elbow isn't balanced, your whole body has to be balanced. And so it calls the whole being into work.
Yeah.
Now there's balance and hearing, which are somehow related. So here's where I'm exploiting you today. I'm asking you, based on your knowledge, and you don't know much about Chris's work, you haven't had a chance to see it, it's just my representation of it, but we absolutely see children on these boards, sometimes with a lot of skill, sometimes with very little, smiling, interacting, feeling like they're part of the world again. What do you think is happening from your point of view?
Well, obviously the child's physiological state is changing, and it's going to one of those neural platforms or levels in which spontaneous social behavior becomes immersion property of that state. So you're giving me enough cues, but I would deconstruct it even more.
Okay.
I wouldn't just say the child's happy. I would say the child's making is looking directly at the other person, is utilizing the muscles of the upper part of the face, and that's where you're seeing happiness. So they're triggering what I call the social engagement system, and when they're doing that, they also start shifting physiological state. The part that I am not totally knowledgeable about, just slightly, is the role of vestibular stimulation. And the vestibular stimulation can affect autonomics, because we know that you can get nauseous from spinning. And we also know that autistic kids tend not to get nauseous from spitting, that they try to use vestibular stimulation as a way of regulating their own state. And what Chris is doing is that the child is getting the vestibular stimulation, but is keeping it contained or regulated by what I call social engagement, the face-to-face interactions. So yeah, the child's going through a profound neural exercise. The child's not just playing, but I really think that reciprocal interactive play is one of the most efficient and powerful neural exercises for our social engagement system, and how it regulates, how that system is involved with regulating our physiological state, in a sense, enabling us to be calmer. So what she is probably seeing is that after the skateboarding, the child is calmer and has, let's say, windows of time of spontaneous social engagement. So where the child is, in a sense, leading the caregiver or leading the parent or leading the skateboarder that is the buddy on this one in the social interaction, not like ABA in behavior mod. It's not where you give a stimulus, you get a response. There's a role reversal now where the child is now doing the leading. And I imagine that's occurring. And that is what is really triggering in the other, whether it's the parent or another caregiver, a feeling that the child is really, in this world and making contact with it.
Gotcha. And in order to have social engagement, which is a higher level functioning of the nervous system, you have to feel safe.
The body has to be in a state of feeling safe. There's another part of the word with safe that I often use is trust. So in this situation, the child's developing a trust for the person that they're working with on skateboarding. And that enables their body to give up its defenses. So even though they're moving in what may appear to be dangerous, they have a feeling of trust with the person they're with. And once you feel trust in your body, the body gives up the defenses. So that's part of the exercise going on.
Gotcha. And then isn't there also something where there is unpredictability and variability and interest in a context of safety? In other words, we need both. We thrive on both.
The beauty, if we start looking at the development of human beings, from the infant to the toddler to the child, we realize that it starts off with a lot of co-regulation and caring, but that co-regulation provides resilience that then leads to self-regulation and exploration. So we have had the wrong model. We think that if we're too co-regulatory with our children, they'll be too dependent. And what happens is that co-regulation is the natural neurophysiological, evolutionarily necessary neural exercise to create the nervous system's resilience so that they can be self-regulatory and exploratory.
Gotcha. Because in truth, the infant is not able to regulate him or herself by himself.
No.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. The infant is totally dependent. It's dependent not really on food and protection, but also thermoregulate. Everything for that child's life is dependent. And when the child is not, in a sense, feeling safe, the child's body goes into these defenses. Now, there are some children who are not easily comforted. They are regulatory disordered, or they're irritable children, or fussy children, whatever term you want to have. They're normally responding to visceral pain. They have a lot of gas, and their body is a reflection, their behavior is a reflection of that bodily state.
Yeah. But let's say in a fortunate circumstance where a child isn't impinged by physical pain on a constant basis, the normal, without that being a problem, the normal state of evolution is co-regulation, where the mother or whoever the caretaker is and the infant teaches the infant how to regulate itself.
Well, we use the word teach, and we kind of use it as if it's a higher level cognitive understanding. Let's say the infant learns, it may not be in the level of awareness, but the body starts developing an expectancy that will be taken care of. And that's what we call trust. So, and other people use word like attachment, but the actual underlying process is not attachment. It's really trusting the attachment figure.
Gotcha. And so when the volunteer is working with the child, it is a co-regulation going on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And that is okay, so as mammals, we evolved to connect with others and to co-regulate. In the children who are autistic, they have great difficulty co-regulating and even more difficulty self-regulating. But it means that if you bring someone into their place rather than calming them, the person becomes a stimulus, a trigger of defensiveness.
Gotcha.
And it's not just merely the explanation of saying, you don't have to worry, I'm safe. The body won't believe that. But what Chris has done in her the technology of the skateboarding is the child's body is learning to be accepting of another person, to self-regulate, which is creating the safety of doing something that is a little risky on some level.
Gotcha.
So it's the face-to-face eye contact, the social referencing, and the vestibular stimulation. These are all powerful cues. Now, also remember, a movement is very important too, especially for an individual who can't sit still, and many autistic kids are very agitated. And so the movement becomes a structured way of functionally releasing that energy and then triggering a neural circuit through social interaction to co-regulate.
Gotcha. And people should be encouraged that this wiring, so to speak, is inborn in all of us, regardless of the afflictions that might have been rained on us.
Yeah.
It's still in there. We're born this way with these capacities. We just need someone to help us.
We need the triggers to allow them to be expressed.
Yeah.
And this is the optimistic story of what polyvagal theory brings to us. Now, it doesn't mean that some of these circuits may be somewhat compromised in some individuals, but it means that we have potential.
Yes.
And so it's a real positive story that's parsimonious. So if we can trigger the system, many of the attributes that are the most disruptive features of being autistic or having some other developmental disability can be reduced.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that's going to be very helpful for Chris and her supporters and all her fans and the people that participate in the program. Now they're having fun with the program, they're seeing results, but now they'll have an idea of, okay, there is science behind this.
There's science behind the role that co-regulation plays as a neural exercise. There's science behind the notion of movement with social engagement as being playful. That's what our nervous system likes. So if we watch children playing, they're not just moving, they're doing face-to-face co-regulation. And when we watch children on the playground, those that get into fights or those that are moving hit someone by mistake and walk away because they're not really engaging another. So what Chris's model is doing is fostering this interaction of co-regulation and enabling the child to have these positive feelings, which really it can be translated to say, Chris's technology is allowing the child to feel trust. And that's a powerful feeling.
Beautiful. Thank you.